starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Tracy Fitzpatrick, and I'll be your moderator today. Thank you so much for joining us here at Netcom Learning, a market leader in promoting lifelong learning, training, and talent development solutions. We're very excited to host today's webinar, Enhanced Security and Innovation with Windows Server 2016. Presenting today's topic is Richard Erdley, a 2017 MCSE in Azure and Virtualization. Richard has also been an IT professional for over 30 years and a Microsoft certified trainer since 1995. He's been working with Microsoft SharePoint since the first version was released in 2001. Richard's specialties include Microsoft SharePoint, Microsoft Exchange, Windows 7 SQL Server, and Windows Server. Now, please bear in mind that this is an overview of a very robust topic. We do offer a collection of technical and business courses that can be tailored towards your specific requirements. If you are interested in a further discussion, you can make an appointment with our learning consultants through our website at netcomlearning.com. Today's session is also being recorded, so you will get free access to the recording in the next 24 hours via email. And now I would like to invite Peter O'Keefe, Chief Learning Strategist here at Netcom Learning, who would like to discuss some values and important items. Go ahead, Peter.
Hey, thanks, Tracy. Appreciate everyone's time here this afternoon. Yes, my name is Peter O'Keefe. I'm the Chief Learning Strategist here at Netcom Learning. A couple things about Netcom Learning. Our objective is to help customers build innovative learning organizations themselves. We want to help you build a smarter workforce, adopt a change, drive the growth, and we do this through our broad catalog of offerings that you see here, the ability to create custom learning plans, and to help with any global delivery needs that you have across any continent. Next slide, Tracy. Our managed learning services is a way we help our customers deploy educational solutions in a variety of contexts, whether that's through consulting, content development, delivery, technology, platform administration, etc. Tracy? We go to market with our 9 practice areas in which we specialize. These practice areas encompass people, process, and technology training. Today's presentation is going to be from the security practice area, by which Richard will be speaking to a variety of topics within the Windows Server 2016 platform. Netcom Learning offers a comprehensive portfolio for training solutions around Windows Server 2016. Here are some of our upcoming classes with respect to our public schedule on the installation, networking, identity with Windows Server 2016, and if you already know a previous version, the popular upgrade classes like the 2743 may also be of interest to you. Please keep in mind that for any of these courses that you see today, or the other topics that Richard's speaking about, Azure, SharePoint, etc., we build custom learning plans for our customers with respect to their audience's unique needs. So a lot of these classes can be put together in a custom format, removing modules, adding some modules in to define a solution specific to what your deployment of that product may be. Also at the bottom of this screen, you see a promo code. Today, we're offering this promo code for you for about 2 weeks until November 29th to receive an additional 15% off of these public classes. But of course, we'd love to hear from you as well on any private learnings that you might need as well. Of course, netcomlearning.com is our website that you can go to for anything you need. Just do a simple search off that URL and type in Windows Server 2016, SharePoint, Azure, and you'll see a list of courses specific to that search. So thank you. And with that, I'd like to turn it back to Tracy.
Thank you so much, Peter. So why should you all attend this webinar today? Security is a top priority for you and your company. In the last few years, we've seen an increased number of companies breached, information leaked, and cybersecurity cases in the news. Clearly, everyone's organization does need to strengthen its security posture, but where do you start? With this webinar, you can explore how you can enhance innovation and agility while maintaining security, resilience, and performance with features in the latest Windows Server 2016. And now I'd just like to give you a quick overview of the logistics before we get started. To start with, you do have the option to adjust the window size to your liking. Simply hit the Escape key and find the Zoom button on the top left corner of your GoToWebinar viewer. Everyone has been muted except for our presenters. Feel free to submit any questions you have for the presenters here in the questions pane, and we will address them at the end of the session. A PDF copy of today's slides are also in the handout section of your GoToWebinar viewer. And in just a few moments, I'm going to pass this off to Richard, who will be presenting today's topic. Okay, Richard, go ahead. You are live.
Hello, everyone. My name is Richard Ertley. I've been doing this a long time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start out by giving you an introduction. I used to be a Novell CNI, so I have a lot of experience. I've also had a lot of capabilities in another course we teach is some of the CompTIA stuff. So I'm going to briefly show you my camera so you can see what I look like. I'm the guy who teaches the classes, so that's why I'm doing this. Now, one of the concepts I want to give you is that the slide deck has additional links embedded in it. I cannot possibly cover even a fraction of some of the capabilities that are available in Server 2016. I can't cover them all. So in a number of the slides, I've embedded additional links to give you additional information. So I'm going to start out with just this general amount. And yes, I talk this fast all the time. So some of the new features are Nano Server, containers, Docker, cloud integration, what's new in Hyper-V, the ability to remove and add virtual machine or virtual memory and network adapters. What's a converged network? What are software-defined networks? The fact that we now support the same thing VMware does, nested virtualization, PowerShell Direct, shielded virtual machines, storage spaces, and some of the other capabilities. So let me start in the upper left-hand corner. What's Nano Server? Essentially, ladies and gentlemen, we started out with a GUI environment. The GUI had 3 or 4 gigabytes of space that it took up on a hard drive. Ran. Then they went to something called Server Core, which was around 100 services, was roughly 1.1 gigabytes in size. Nano Server is approximately 400 to 500 megabytes in size and doesn't do much. It's designed for one purpose, to display virtual machines or containers, which I'll cover here in a few minutes. What we're looking for is a level of density to get the maximization of our hardware. Return on investment would be the best phrase. Nano Server provides that. So what the capabilities are, I can provide a host for Hyper-V virtual machines, clustered or not. For example, it is possible to mount a Nano Server on a piece of hardware. So it is a very, very small footprint. You can also create it in what's called a scaled out file server, which is active. If we want to do storage spaces direct, you can actually store information there. If you want to run web servers in a very small environment, your choice. And again, the focus of today's class is on Server 2016, although there's no way avoiding Azure or the cloud. And so when I speak of these things, these same capabilities are available, whether you're in Azure or whether you're in Amazon Web Services, an IaaS machine, all the same capabilities. The key bullet there in the bottom of a Nano Server, it can act as a host for developers to use for cloud applications that run in a container. And I'm going to cover that just now. What's a container? Ladies and gentlemen, one of the concepts of security, which is the underlying theme of this presentation, is that if you're a domain admin or a server admin on a Hyper-V machine, you can access...
Hi, Richard. I'm sorry to interrupt. Can you restart the slideshow? And I think the cam may be interrupting we're getting a black box over your PowerPoint. So restart the PowerPoint and then come off the
cam. They see my face. They don't need it anymore. Yep. Very good.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, right there. So you've heard my voice, an overview of containers. Let me start this slideshow. Sorry about that. Anyway. Can everyone still hear me? Tracy?
You're good.
Very good. Okay. So what's a container? If you're an administrator on the domain or inside of a server, you have access to the resources in that computer, and there's no way for us to stop you. In a container, you have 2 abilities. Number 1, I can restrict access to only the people that have permission. And that does not need to include a domain administrator. In effect, you become a janitor for the capabilities. The second beauty of a container, whether they're Hyper-V or VMware or Docker, is that a developer can create a container that's self-contained. In effect, all we have is a plug that allows us connectivity to the underlying operating system, which connects to the underlying hardware. That's the new environment. And if you're familiar with Docker, which is a Microsoft supported environment, you're going, Microsoft supports open source, has for a number of years. But this is a nice slide which basically says, can I do Windows containers? I'm running it in user mode as if it was an executable. If any of you are familiar with application virtualization, that's what this reminds me of. It communicates through that to the host OS, which kernel, and then to the blue at the bottom of the screen to the actual hardware itself. Now, if I install Hyper-V, I can run containers inside a virtual machine, and they're still protected. That's just some example of what capabilities exist. So what you do, look in the right-hand side of my screen first. When a user is accessing programs in a container, it's viewed as simply an application, like any other program. It's the underlying infrastructure which is controlling access. So as you see, the containers are stateless. The data is theirs in the application. I have a sandbox and I have a buffer where it says empty. Essentially, I want you to think of that as either a restore point or a buffer or if you're familiar with in a virtual machine environment, an extra disk where my data is stored. But the key point to realize is this all is hidden through an abstraction layer. The end user doesn't see it. But if I need to manage it, it's there. And it's isolated. And if it's isolated this way, viruses can't get to it. If I, as a domain admin, can't get to it, then a virus can't get to it. I might infect the OS through some stupidity on my part, but I'm not going to be able to affect the container. So what's Docker? It's an open source, open standard methodology that's probably the most popular way of creating containers. There's a thing called Docker Hub. Think of GitHub, but for images, hundreds of images, pre-created with already created open source containers. Well, what's different about this, ladies and gentlemen, is unlike Windows containers, Docker support is built into the OS. It's embedded in the computer environment at the kernel level, thread priority 24. So when I say it's built in, this is not like adding an interpreter or something. It's built into the operating system. Why would I use it? Because you want to download open source software. I was reading an article just last night about what percent of Azure is open source. 40% of the machines are running Linux in Azure. It's just the standard. We still have Microsoft operating systems and platform as a service and software as a service, but it doesn't matter. Docker Hub is essentially a cloud-based location where you can download images of Ubuntu, CentOS, especially Red Hat and SUSE. Multiple capabilities are also built into Azure. Now, this doesn't happen to Windows Server, but Kubernetes, which is all of you are familiar with, if you're familiar with Chef and Puppet and different ways to manage containers, well, the Google creation is supported only in the cloud. It is not supported in Server 2016, even in the 1709 update. But Docker is the future. Containers are the future. To me, it's no different than if I look back 5 years ago and said, what would I start learning? I would have said virtualization. Now I'm saying containers in a virtualized environment. So essentially what you have here is an abstraction layer. And when I talk about software-defined networks in a few minutes and converged networks, ladies and gentlemen, in each and every case, you have an abstraction layer that acts as an interface. If you remember Server 2012, you had a thing called IP address management. Or if you're familiar with virtual machines, if you have VMware, you have vCenter. That's a layer that manages virtual hosts across physical servers. Well, the Docker engine has that same capability. I have multiple containers, application one container, with its internal binaries and libraries, and it interfaces with Docker. So Docker acts as a, if I was teaching a class, I would call this the wait staff. The kitchen is through the OS, but realize something. All of a sudden, this Docker engine can interface with an infrastructure which is local, in a SAN, or on the cloud, and it's all isolated. The key point I want to make to you about Docker and containers is optimization of resources. No spare, I don't need a bunch of cycles or RAM to run a program. It's all very, very compact, a greater level of density, more bang for your buck. Now, what does it mean integrate with cloud services? What happens is you have all sorts of infrastructure as a service capabilities. So the first thing we want to look at is, can we do Office 365, which is essentially software as a service? Can I integrate with my Server 2016 on-premise environment? It's called a hybrid mode. I can do it with Skype for Business. I can do it with PowerShell. I can do all sorts of interconnectivity. If I want my mailboxes, some in the cloud, some on-prem, in Server 2016 Exchange, easy. If I want to manage, I'm going to take the second bullet there, and I'm going to cover the orange one at the top in just a moment. If I want to manage mobile devices, I'm going to use Intune. If you were to buy an Apple phone through the corporate purchase plan, there's actually a little button on the front that says register with Intune. It's built in. Outside companies are integrating with the cloud environment. AWS and Azure are in the fourth quadrant. They are the only in the magic quadrant. Everybody else is lower. And I'm talking about IBM and Google and everybody else. So I can create virtual networks that, as far as you're concerned, are simply an extension of your on-premise network. I can do site backup. I can back up physical machines. So if I'm running Server 2016, I can actually back up and create a virtual machine. I can have a hot site in the cloud. What do you mean a hot site? A hot site means you can run it. Yes, it's called site recovery. If your physical machine has died and I need to run it for a few days in Azure, done. Turn it on, run it, and connect, because it's running in a VNet environment. All of these capabilities all resolve around something called Azure AD. Now, the only thing it has in relationship with Active Directory on-premise are two words, AD. It is not an X.500 database. It's actually an identity management structure. I'll cover that in a few minutes. But whether you're getting an Azure subscription or Office 365, everybody gets a stub of Azure Active Directory. So what is it? Cloud-based identity management. Ladies and gentlemen, in the slide, you have a remote worker, which could be anywhere. They communicate through federation, if you've gone through federation, and you communicate with the on-premise environment through a federation server using single sign-on. I know, lots of TLAs. But what happens is, if you look on the right-hand side where the vertical red bar is, that actually updates information from Active Directory, 141 fields to be exact. Having nothing better to do, I once counted them. And it actually copies them to Azure in Azure AD. So the on-premise domain controller does not replicate. It takes the information using a mechanism called dir sync, using a tool called Azure AD Connect, which is really a crippled version of Microsoft Identity Management. Okay, that's the concept. So the remote worker neither knows nor cares. I'll give you a small example of this. If you have a Windows 10 device, you can actually authenticate to your in-house domain, Server 2016, through Azure AD. My Windows 10 machine can authenticate to Azure and access on-premise resources if I have federation. Yes, I can identify with internal directory services or the cloud. The user neither knows nor cares. No different than you making a cell phone call. Do you care which cell tower you go through? I just want my phone call to go through. So that's what's happening is the whole theme of this is we have abstraction behind the scenes that the end user doesn't see, but we use as a control network, whether it's converged, whether it's software-defined networks. We have an overlayer. And I used, if you have Microsoft System Center Virtual Machine Manager, aggregates and controls multiple Hyper-V servers. I have vCenter if I'm using VMware. No one cares anymore. The religious wars are over. More or less. There's still somebody who wants their environment better than someone else's. But let me make it a point to all of you. The Chief Technology Officer for Azure is Mark Rusanovich. He writes modules. He writes modules for CentOS and Ubuntu. So if they rely on him to add extra infrastructure, you can imagine his attitude toward this kind of operating systems in Azure. He doesn't care. They are supported at the same level. And I'll cover that when I talk about secure boot for Linux. Anyway, Azure is multi-tenant. It has millions of tenants. You get a tenant ID. Internet compatible protocols are how we communicate, HTTPS. Now we have users, groups, applications, and if I have federation, I can do devices. You mean, it's like Workplace Join was. You can have a device validated through federation and use that as the basis for accessing restricted resources. Now, we don't have OUs and we don't have computer objects. Why? Because they're part of Kerberos, and Azure doesn't support Kerberos. It supports OAuth and OpenGL and a lot of other capabilities, but it doesn't support Kerberos. So we don't have domain join or group policy. Now, it is also possible to create your own Azure Active Directory environment. But that's not part of this webinar. It's kind of weird. So what happens on Hyper-V? Well, ladies and gentlemen, an asset that you need to consider is in security is isolation. And that's what we're talking about here. Host resource protection, nested virtualization. So let's talk about something. If any of you are familiar with what's called a jump server, you go to an intermediate device to connect to another machine. We have protected virtual machines. Essentially, if someone tried to copy a virtual machine, either deliberately or accidentally, and take it somewhere else, it won't boot. You can't get in it. It's required to authenticate to a third device before it will boot up. That's called shielded virtual machines. I jumped ahead there. What's host resource protection? If any of you are familiar with the old days of file resource manager, I want to allocate just enough memory, CPU, and NIC so the host is not choked back. Yeah, you get your own isolated environment, and I'm going to take the rest from a Hyper-V environment. Nesting, I can start a virtual machine inside of a Hyper-V virtual machine. I can nest. You're going, well, VMware could do that a number of years ago. Well, we do it now also. You're going to find that VMware and Hyper-V are pretty much convergent. Many of the functionalities that you're used to in VMware are now built into Hyper-V. PowerShell Direct, one of the problems with talking to a virtual machine is essentially you're creating an RDP session. If you have PowerShell Direct, you have the ability, if you have the right credentials, to talk to it directly, without creating an RDP environment. I've already covered shielded virtual machines. What's a virtual trusted platform module? BitLocker. The same capability you have on a server environment, we can do in Hyper-V Server 2016 machines. We are limited, but I'm going to create a virtual trusted platform module, and I can do virtual BitLocker on VHDs. Now, one aspect I want to make you aware of is Server 2016 does support VHD Type 1 and Type 2. Type 2 allows you to boot to a SCSI infrastructure. Azure only supports Type 1. Just a bit of trivia for you, but in other words, it doesn't support VHDX. Server 2016 does. What's a checkpoint? Think of a restore point. If any of you are familiar with Unified Extensible Firmware Interface, it took the place of BIOS. Linux has had trouble with that. Well, Azure and Windows Server, if you have virtual machines, allow you to boot to Linux, even if the image that was created came from a UEFI environment instead of a BIOS environment. Hyper-V Manager, much more reliable, and storage quality of service. Ladies and gentlemen, one of the problems in Hyper-V was that sometimes a virtual machine could grab up the bandwidth, accessing storage, and hog the whole thing. In essence, again, we have a converged layer, an abstraction layer, which says, no, you can't use all of that. You're allocated this much at a minimum, this much as a maximum. So one virtual machine can't restrict the functionality of another virtual machine. They're all good network citizens. And these slides you're seeing right here, I have links embedded inside the slide themselves. So if you want additional information, drill deep. So in 2016, the virtual machine environment, we have virtual switches that was totally rewritten. I want to take the third bullet. It now has plugins from Cisco, Juniper, for third-party forwarding extensions. Essentially, Cisco, Juniper, and some of the other open source software plugs into the virtual switch. It's not isolated anymore. By doing that, it opens up your ability to turn it into, God forbid, a very expensive switch. So essentially, if you're going to look at buying an expanded Cisco switch, this comes free. It's built into Hyper-V and has much of the same functionality. Load balancing, access control list. I can create a VLAN through an access control list port. I can have credentials as people connect. The fourth bullet down, receive side scaling. As the bandwidth increases, I can increase and add more buffers and call more CPU resources. In the past, in Server 2012, if a download took up 100% of a single core, that was it. I don't care what the speed was, you couldn't get any more. Receive side scaling adds more RAM, adds more cores to allow greater connectivity speed. Port mirroring, if you were going to do something like, Wireshark, and you wanted to capture packets for analysis for some reason, the switch now supports that. Create your own VLAN, basically isolation based not just on port, but some other attribute. And bandwidth management, once again, an abstraction layer which controls. I'll talk about in a moment when I talk about switch-enabled teaming in the next slide. Essentially, I'm going to take and create, again, an abstraction. I'm going to take physical NICs that are inside the Hyper-V host, and I'm going to have up to 8 of them embedded in the switch. And so I can actually control many of the activities on a switch directly. The switch controls the NIC, not the operating system. I've cut out the middleman. Lots of capabilities. So what's it mean, converged network or hyper-converged? Well, the good news is, essentially, I have one set of bandwidth and all my packets can go over it. What's the downside? A SIP packet for Skype for Business or any other kind of voice over IP is far more fragile to latency and jitter than, say, FTP, which couldn't care less. So what you have is in a converged network, we have to be able to control the traffic and make them all good citizens. I have a bicycle lane for SIP, and I have a high-speed lane for FTP. We have that capability. In essence, we allow QoS, independent of the protocol, IP4. I have QoS built into switches and the infrastructure. What are some of the capabilities? Teaming. Now in the past, we had NIC teaming since '08. But at the very bottom, I can now take these NICs and embed them. Here's the difference. In the previous NIC teaming environment, it was embedded in the OS. Teaming was done in the operating system. So I could take 2 different brands of NICs and embed them. And if you take my classes, yes, I talk this fast all the time, and I talk at this level of intensity. Normally in a class, I would be clicking on additional material to validate what I'm saying. I would show you little blurbs. I don't have that luxury here. I don't have enough time. But when I talk in class, I'm all the time adding additional information. So when I talk about switch embedded teaming, they do have to be identical. But I've removed the overhead of the OS, and it's now teamed in the NIC. I'll give you a small example. If you had a iSCSI host bus adapter on your Hyper-V host, well, that's embedded, and I've got 2 NICs that are teamed going through 2 separate switches to connect to the iSCSI SAN interface. They're dedicated for that. In a converged network, we're all one big happy family, and I have some abstraction layer managing it. We have that capability. So I've already talked about virtual switches. I've implied we have quality of service. I'll give you a small example. In the old days, I used to go into a switch and make SIP protocol number 1, and FTP would be put at the very end of the line. File transfer protocol didn't care about delays, but I made SIP always go to the head of the line inside the switch because IP4 had no QoS. But when I do converged networks, we have the ability for all the devices on the network to work together to optimize and give enough resources to every single type of protocol and packet without running out. And isolation, many of these capabilities. So I didn't normally do this, but what do you mean RDMA? If you remember the old days and 286 servers, I know you're going back a ways. We had the thing called direct memory access. Well, now using this capability built into switch embedded teaming, we have remote direct memory access. Essentially, we keep cutting out the middleman, the operating system, talk directly to the virtual machines running in Hyper-V. Straightforward, lots of capabilities. Ladies and gentlemen, I could talk for the next 2 hours. I can't cover all the new networking functionality, but I need to make a point. That's this. In the old days, people used to look at me and say, Richard, is hardware or software solution better? And my answer was always the same, hardware. Hardware has dedicated chips that are not suffering overload, where software has other capabilities. Now, ladies and gentlemen, when you go to virtualization, it's all software. If you were to buy a big IP F5 device to put in your environment, it's going to come to you, if it's virtualized, on a little USB. It's all software anymore. So in effect, the hardware-software distinction is no longer valid. All of the software capability is there. If any of you remember Nortel, they believe the world will always be physical switches. Now that company of 80,000 people is long gone because many companies now have virtual switches. It's all virtualized. It's all software. So many of the preconceived notions you might have had earlier about, well, I don't want to do this in software, that's gone. Yeah, went too fast. So anyway, this is an example. I have virtual machines going through a virtual switch, and I can combine the communication. So all of a sudden, all of it, management, backup, storage, cluster, migration, all go through the teamed NICs, and I can prioritize the traffic at an abstraction layer. I go, okay, backup during the day, lowest priority. Management, medium. Access to storage, high. Easy. And I can dynamically reconfigure the device. So when I hear this word abstraction and converged or software-defined networks, it's the ability to dynamically prioritize traffic. That's the key. So I spoke of it a moment ago. What's software-defined networking? I like this bullet. Software-defined networking is to networks what server virtualization was to physical servers. Now, one of the problems I had, because I'm older, is I have to let go of how I'd done it for the previous 20 years. I've been doing this a long time. Novell, Lantastic, if you remember that. Way old software. So Microsoft embeds these features. Now, your next question is, why do I care? Ladies and gentlemen, up to this point in time, like if you had Server 2012 and you wanted converged networks or software-defined networks, you had to buy third-party software, which is not inexpensive, and you had to buy third-party hardware and make it all work together. What Microsoft has done in 2016 is add these capabilities. They're built into the operating system at the OS core level. That's why I said it has been rewritten. So much of what you had to do through third-party products, you don't. Now, I'm not going to lie to you and tell you that Server 2016 is going to be as powerful as a $35,000 or $50,000 blade. I'm not going to say that to you. For many organizations who have a small environment or a small footprint, the built-in functionality of Server 2016, rather than pay the money for much more expensive products, save $50,000, do it at a reduced level, but it didn't exist before. It does in 2016. So one of the capabilities is a thing called a network controller. Once again, if you remember the concept of, in 2012, IP address management, a window to manage all the independent DHCP and DNS servers. A network controller is the exact same thing, but I have a software layer which combines the ability to manage firewalls, radius servers. I can manage it from one screen, not using System Center, but using a thing called a network controller. So when I talked about routing and remote access, multi-tenant gateway, I can control all of this from a central server. Think of it as an administration server if you want. What is software-defined networking? SDN. I'm going to virtualize the network layer, again, to dynamically reallocate resources based on traffic. I'm going to create policies for both physical and virtual so they all play well together. I don't have to go in and tune them manually. I can do it at a higher level. For example, in most major cities, you have connections to a central organization which can control traffic light timing, both for the entry ramp on the expressway and for all of the lights in the intersection. In essence, if I have outbound traffic, I'm going to have them running longer from 4:30 to 5:30 than I do for the cross streets. Dynamically doing city reallocation of traffic lights, that would be the equivalent. Based on need, based on demand. I'll give you my best example. Many years ago, I had 24 modems that were outbound. But at 5 o'clock, I took 23 of them and made them inbound. I would have to physically switch them around through an octopus cable so that all the roaming individuals could access their email. I was the software-defined network as a human. So this is a general term, but Microsoft adds all this together, all these terms, the gateway, virtual machine manager, I'm at the bottom of the screen, which is like VMware vCenter. What's operations manager? System Center operations manager. Actually has management packs to look when something is not working correctly and notify you even at 4 o'clock in the morning. The other terms I believe you're familiar with, concept of virtual switches, virtualization. This is simply an embedded slide, which I added as a graphic for those of you who download. This is a nice slide. I found that if you read, there's links at the bottom of this when you open up the slide, but it's a nice summary. It's got kind of like a poster. I've got multiple hosts. I've got multiple virtual machines, and I can create a VNet which spans, if you look at that closely in the top row, the VNet spans multiple hosts, and I can move the VMs around to whatever resources are available. Very cool. And define all of the capabilities. In essence, host 1 has more NICs or less NICs, has less traffic or more traffic. I'm going to make it go through that. Here's a small example. I have a test virtual machine and a production virtual machine. Note how they're isolated, which may be what you want. But if I do a network that's virtualized, then it's software defined as to which node can talk to which machine, and I can do it dynamically or I can isolate it. But once again, I have a control panel instead of going and doing it physically. I don't have to manage these things. It's an abstraction layer. What are the benefits? Flexibility. What host do I put it on? Multi-tenant support, isolation, recycle IP addresses. Essentially, ladies and gentlemen, the middle bullet in the bottom half there, transparent moving, machines and an infrastructure as a service cloud. And at each level, I can monitor resource utilization and control it. Network controller allows software load balancing, virtual network management, routing and remote access server gateway, and firewall. Do any of you remember the old days when we used to configure firewalls and we configured security? Then they had a thing, and you could actually have one done correctly and the other done correctly, but they didn't work together because you had blocked a port that was open. Well, that's what's occurring here. All of these things work together to allow remote connectivity. And by centralizing it, it's like having advanced firewall. If I set it up here, I'm not allowed to mess with it over there. Centralized management and scaling up. Here's simply a nice picture of what a network controller can do. Note that I can manage access to the internet. It's like a train station. I can control the tracks. Who's connecting to what and where. Storage. I'm not here to tell you that an EMC SAN is equal to a storage area network. But if you look at a lower level, like a network access storage, a NAS, then the Microsoft storage features are more than equal to a high-end NAS or a low-end SAN. So I'm going to talk about later in a few moments about storage spaces. In the past, we had storage environments where I had an iSCSI target server. But when I do a software-defined network for storage, it doesn't matter. All of it can communicate. So storage features allow connectivity no matter what it is. Like for the bottom bullets here, resilient file system, which came out in Server 2012. Highly tolerant, even if a VM dies in the middle of a read or a write operation, it's recoverable. Offline data transfer, if the NIC supports it. Doing data duping. So again, storage, I'm going to have a thing called software-defined storage. If I can do software-defined networks, I can do software-defined storage. Again, to make storage access and converged network of updating and uploading files, good citizens. The bottom two bullets, we have capabilities if you want to do dynamic access control. It came out in 2012 R2. In other words, can I allow or deny transmission of a file based on hidden information? I can screen. I can classify a file. I can create storage usage. Anyway, it's based on software-defined storage. It's built in. Once again, an abstraction layer to allow dynamic reallocation of resources, like storage spaces. So the end user or the end program doesn't care. It's going to communicate through all of these capabilities, whether it's I'm doing cluster shared volumes, scaled out file servers. And by the way, to give you an example, scaled out file server is not like DFS. I have active. I might have 5 of them. So basically, it's an internal, much more reliable scaled out file server. It's way better than DFS. But we still do the same thing we did before. We take a bunch of empty hard drives. Here's the difference, though. Look at the very bottom, right here, software storage bus. Ladies and gentlemen, that gives you the ability to replace, again, that dynamic. I don't have 2 Hyper-V team NICs talking to a host bus adapter, talking to a storage server. I have the ability to reallocate utilization. That's called storage spaces direct. A lot of capabilities. It's in many cases an update of some of the storage space capability in 2016. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I have no way, I could talk on for another day without taking a drink. But part of the reason you might be here, because if you take the 70-243 test, which we teach, is basically preparation for tests. So a quick summary for you. Microsoft tests are mean, underhanded, devious, and tricky. But they're many times based on troubleshooting, and they're almost always based on PowerShell questions. So there's over 100 questions in the pool. So if you already have an MCSE or an MCSA in Server 2012, you can take the 7243 update test, and it's better than taking the three other tests sequentially. You can take one 40-question test, and you're suddenly a 2016 MCSA. That is a quick summary of this. Now, what we're going to do is open this up for questions. Do any of you have any questions?
Thank you so much, Richard. We will get to the questions in just a few moments. We do want to remind everyone that Netcom Learning does offer a comprehensive portfolio for Windows Server 2016 training options, which you will see on your screen. I'm going to pull those up for you. So again, here is a list of classes that you can enroll in, and we have a special promo code that you can use, and this is all valid until November 29th, 2017. And we want to let you know that we can also deliver private training to teams, of which the learning plan can be customized to the specific needs of your audience. And these offerings can be found with a simple search on our website, netcomlearning.com. Did you want to add something, Richard?
Yes. What people might look at this and say, my capabilities are all in Server 2016. Ladies and gentlemen, I've taught Exchange since 5.0. So Exchange, Skype for Business, SharePoint, all the System Center products. Pretty much, they all integrate with each other. So it isn't just these 4 products. That's our promotion, and that's what we're having coming up shortly. But I also teach the other courses. Sorry?
Okay. And we all know that technical skills are necessary to empower your career, but do you need to improve or upgrade your leadership skills as well in order to accelerate your career? Along with your technical abilities, develop the skills you need to manage yourself, others, and business better. Welcome to Starter Learning, a collaborative knowledge platform bringing the world's best business and leadership insights from Fortune 1000 leaders, best-selling authors, and Ivy League professors. Further, if you are interested in learning from the top American leaders, you can log on to the e-learning platform, starterlearning.com, and avail the special promotion meant for first-time users. You can use coupon code STARTER10 and begin your leadership journey right now. And right now we are going to launch a quick poll to find out how many of you would like to be aware of additional training that we will be offering. So please just take a few moments to get on this poll and fill it out before you all log off. And in addition, we do have a lot more informative webinars coming up. And you can go to netcomlearning.com/webinars in order to register. And don't forget to like and follow our social media pages to get the latest technology updates. You can refer to the GoToWebinar chat window for our links on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Google+. And now, Richard, let's get to some of those questions. First one, do the VMs/servers need beefed up NICs to handle the added networking capability, or is this recommended?
Basically, what you're going to, in the old days, we used to have a percentage utilization. But if you have the proper host, whether it's VMware host, Citrix host, or Hyper-V, what you look at is you have the 4 horsemen, I call them, RAM, CPU, NIC, and network. And that was the beauty of that software-defined network. I can move a VM. I don't need to boost it. I can move it to another host that has more RAM or more NIC functionality, more capability. Does that answer your question? I can either add more RAM dynamically. That was what I meant about hot add. In the beginning slide, I talked about hot adding RAMs and NIC. So you don't have to reboot it, but you can boot it up. You can have it running and add more RAM on the fly if you want to. Did that answer your question? Did that answer your question?
We'll hear from him if it has not. In regards to converged networking and prioritization of traffic, what is the default settings on 2016?
The default setting is they don't do anything. They basically do an analysis in the beginning, and you get a little report of what your traffic looks like. In essence, ladies and gentlemen, you have to say, where am I now, before where you can say, where do I want to go? So in a converged network, there are so many settings. Now, is there a best practices? You can actually load that template and it will apply it to your converged network settings and say, that's my starting point. What's my best practice? But in essence, we start out blank and you decide through an analysis of what do I need to do by editing the protocols and the traffic. Keep them coming here.
Okay, does this exist in 2016 core as well?
Yes. The only difference between core and the GUI is we got rid of the GUI. Basically 2 gigabytes and roughly 75 services that were used to support the GUI. Server core is full functional. There's just no GUI. And unlike 2012 R2, you can't add a GUI. Actually, server core is managed either through PowerShell. That's your first choice. I'm holding my hands up as if there was a camera there. Sorry, it's either through PowerShell, remote desktop. That would be one other way to do it. Another choice is if you have a remote server administration toolkit on your environment. Or you can actually go to the computer itself and run sconfig, which opens up a very ugly ASCII GUI screen. So that's the 4 ways to monitor and manage it. Remote Server Administration Toolkit is by far the most popular. You get the GUI on your desktop. Okay, next.
So any other final thoughts before we end today's session, Richard?
Yes. Ladies and gentlemen, if any of you work for large corporations, many times people come to me and say, Richard, we like a custom class or a private class. I'm going to turn the camera on. I stole one of their mouse pads. So I'm going to turn the camera on momentarily. I was teaching security, and you can see who I stole the mouse pad from. But what we did is we took the standard book, if you all can see that. Can you see it, Tracy?
No, we're running the poll right now, so we can't see you.
Oh, okay. Well, it's from Tyson. Anyway, the whole point I'm making is that I can customize any of these courses to run in fewer days, a little bit. Or I can customize by adding material. We can create custom courseware. We can combine some of the Server 2016 and maybe some Exchange modules or System Center. If we teach a private class, we are unlimited in what we can do. I have taught 5-day classes in 4 days by dropping material, or I've actually dropped some material and add more. But if you want to consult with me and I can talk to you about what you want, I'm available for that. And I have to do it during my lunch hour or after class because I teach every day. But that's customization if you want it.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Richard, and thank you all for joining us today. If you do come up with any additional questions, feel free to send them to webinar@netcomlearning.com at any time. We hope that you found today's webinar informative, and we look forward to seeing you back here with us soon. Feel free to tell your friends and colleagues about our webinars and other courses. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you. Good night.